We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The rhythmic tapping of David Kim's fingers against the chrome armrest echoed through the examination room of Westwood Memorial Hospital. Outside the window, autumn leaves scattered across the parking lot. Their dance a stark contrast to the sterile whiteness within. At 45, David's weathered hands bore the calluses of 2 decades in construction. Each mark a testament to the company he had built from the ground up. Lauren Daniels' manicured fingers interlaced with his, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. 18 years of marriage had taught him every nuance of her touch. But today, something felt different, mechanical, perhaps rehearsed. "The cough's probably just stress," Lauren said, her voice carrying an odd note of tension. "You've been working too hard on that new project." David cleared his throat, suppressing another cough. "Maybe," but Chris insisted on these tests. The door opened with a soft click as Dr. Chris Morgan entered, his casual stride betraying none of the gravity in his eyes. The thick manila folder in his hands might as well have been made of lead for the weight it carried. "David, Lauren," Chris began, pulling up his rolling stool. The informal use of their names, a remnant of their college days, couldn't mask the professional distance in his tone. "I have your test results." David felt Lauren's hand twitch in his. Her other hand slipped into her purse, fingers brushing against her phone. "The imaging shows a mass in your left lung," Chris continued, his words measured and careful. "The biopsy confirms it's malignant. Stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer." The words hung in the air like smoke. David's construction-trained mind immediately began calculating angles, measuring distances, planning solutions. But this wasn't a building he could fix with blueprints and careful planning. "What's the survival rate?" David asked, his entrepreneur's instinct driving him toward data, concrete numbers he could grasp. Chris leaned forward, spreading several scan images across the table. "With aggressive treatment, the 5-year survival rate is around 30%. But David, you're younger than most patients with this diagnosis, and your overall health is excellent. We have multiple treatment options available." Lauren's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then quickly tucked it away. "What kind of treatment options?" "We're looking at a combination approach," Chris explained, pulling out several pamphlets. "Chemotherapy will be our primary strategy, but we'll also consider radiation therapy. There are also promising clinical trials." Lauren's phone buzzed again. This time, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I need some air," she mumbled, her voice thick with what David assumed was emotion. In her haste, her phone clattered onto the chair as she rushed out. David reached for the device, intending to bring it to her. The screen lit up with another notification, and his world shifted on its axis. The message preview showed a name that had been familiar for 20 years, Adam Carter. The words that followed turned David's blood to ice water. "Babe, finally. Now we don't have to poison him slowly. Nature's doing our job. Once he's gone, the kids already agreed to testify that he was abusive, so we get everything." David's hands trembled as he held the phone, the medical pamphlets scattered forgotten at his feet. He turned the screen toward Chris, whose professional demeanor cracked as he read the message. "David," Chris whispered, quickly closing the door Lauren had left open. "Whatever you do next, don't let them know you've seen this. Don't let them suspect anything's wrong." David stared at the phone, his mind racing through years of memories. Adam Carter, his best friend since college, the best man at his wedding, godfather to his children, the man who had helped him start his construction company, spent countless weekends at their home, and coached Michael's Little League team. "The kids," David managed, his voice hoarse. "Emma and Michael. They're say my children." Chris moved closer, speaking in hushed tones. "David, listen to me carefully. You're facing 2 battles now, and both are life or death. We need to start your treatment immediately, but you also need to protect yourself and your children. Do you have someone you trust? Someone neither Lauren nor Adam would suspect." David's mind wandered to a recent project, a home adaptation he had done for a disabled veteran's son. Mark Travis, a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer, had insisted on paying something despite David's offer to do it at cost. They'd spent several evenings talking while the work was being completed, and Mark had given David his card with a promise. "If you ever need anything, day or night, call me." "I might," David replied, quickly forwarding the message to his email before deleting it from Lauren's phone. "I might have someone." The door handle turned, and Lauren reappeared, her composure restored. She smiled apologetically, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry about that. It was overwhelming, of course," Chris replied smoothly, handing her back her phone. "As I was saying about the treatment options." David sat through the rest of the consultation in a daze, nodding at appropriate intervals while his mind raced. Every touch of Lauren's hand now felt like a serpent's caress. Every concerned look she gave him carried the weight of years of deception. But he maintained his facade, remembering Chris's warning. As they left the hospital, Lauren's hand on his arm, David thought of his children. Emma, 17, with dreams of becoming an architect like her father. Michael, 15, who'd inherited his love for baseball and building things. What lies had they been fed? What poison had been dripped into their ears? "I'll drive," Lauren offered, her voice gentle. "You've had enough shocks for one day." "If you only knew," David thought, following her to their car. He pulled out his phone, ostensibly to check work messages, but his fingers moved to compose a text to Mark Travis. "Need your help. Matter of life and death. Can we meet tonight?" The response came almost immediately. "My office. 8 p.m. Come alone." Mark Travis's basement office looked nothing like the stereotypical private investigator's den from noir films. Instead, it resembled a military command center, with multiple monitors displaying security feeds and a wall of sophisticated equipment humming quietly in the background. The space smelled of coffee and gun oil, and the only concession to comfort was a worn leather couch where David now sat, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "Run it by me again," Mark said, his military short gray hair catching the blue light from the monitors. "Every detail matters." David recounted the day's events, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. Mark's presence had a steadying effect. Here was someone used to dealing with crisis situations, someone who understood strategy and survival. The message mentioned poison, Mark noted, typing rapidly on one of his keyboards. "Have you experienced any unusual symptoms besides the cough?" David's hand went to his throat reflexively. "The cough started about 6 months ago. Lauren's been very insistent about me taking various supplements she says will help boost my immune system." Mark's typing paused. "We'll need samples of everything you've been taking." And David, "Stop taking them immediately. You think they actually, I think we assume the worst and work backward from there." Mark pulled up several databases on his screens. "Adam Carter, you said? Let's see what we can find about your best friend." Over the next 2 weeks, while David began his initial cancer treatments, Mark's investigation uncovered a pattern that made the original betrayal seem almost quaint by comparison. "Look at this," Mark said one evening, spreading surveillance photos across his desk. "Adam's not just sleeping with Lauren. He's been systematically embezzling from your company through a series of ghost contracts." David examined the documents, his builder's eye catching the discrepancies in material orders and labor costs. "These invoices, they're for projects we never did." "Exactly. And that's just the beginning." Mark pulled up financial records on his main screen. "They've taken out additional life insurance policies in your name. The signatures are good forgeries, but the dates are telling. Each policy was purchased shortly after your first symptoms appeared." David leaned back, running a hand through his thinning hair. The chemotherapy had already begun to take its toll, but the evidence of such calculated betrayal hit harder than any treatment. "What about my children?" he asked, dreading the answer. Mark's expression darkened. "That's where it gets worse. I've been monitoring their communications." He reached for a different folder. "You need to see this, but I want you to prepare yourself." Inside were transcripts of text messages, emails, and appointments with child psychologists. The systematic manipulation of his children's memories was laid out in clinical detail. "They've been working on this for years," Mark explained. "Selective reinforcement of negative experiences, subtle suggestions, even creating false memories of events that never happened. It's a technique called memory implantation, and they've been doing it to both Emma and Michael." David read through the transcripts, his hands shaking with rage. How could they do this to children? To their own children? That's the other thing, Mark said quietly. I don't think they plan to keep the children around once they get what they want. He played an audio recording, the voices of Lauren and Adam filling the room. Once we get their testimony and the insurance money we'll need to disappear, Lauren's voice said. The kids will just complicate things. They're old enough to make their own way, Adam replied. Besides, they'll never forgive us once they realize what we did. Better to make a clean break. David surged to his feet, pacing the length of Mark's office. I need to tell them. I need to show them what's happening. Not yet, Mark cautioned. We need more. We need to catch them in the act, document everything. If we move too soon, they'll deny it all. And right now, your kids are primed to believe them over you. The video footage played on Mark's largest monitor, the high-definition image crystal clear despite being shot through a window at Adam's lake house. David watched, his heart breaking, as Lauren and Adam sat with Emma and Michael on an expensive leather couch he'd never known Adam owned. Try to remember, Lauren's voice came through the directional microphone. You were 7, maybe 8. Your father had been drinking. I don't, Emma's face scrunched in confusion. I remember being scared, but the plate, Adam prompted gently, his hand on Emma's shoulder. Remember the plate he threw? Emma's eyes widened. Yes, I remember. Now, he was so angry. David gripped the arms of his chair. I never threw anything. I've never even raised my voice to them. That's the insidious part, said Dr. Claire McPherson, the child psychologist Mark had brought in to consult. They're not just lying to your children. They're actually changing their memories. The human mind is surprisingly malleable, especially regarding childhood experiences. On the screen, Michael shifted uncomfortably. I don't remember Dad throwing anything. You were younger, Lauren said smoothly. Sometimes we block out traumatic memories to protect ourselves. But they're still there, honey. That's why you get anxious when people raise their voices, remember? Michael pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve, a habit David recognized from whenever his son was troubled. I guess, but Dad's never scared me. Not really. That's the fear talking, Adam interjected. It's okay, buddy. We're here to help you remember the truth. Mark stopped the footage. Michael is your weak link in their chain. He's showing resistance to the implanted memories. If we're going to break this open, he might be our best chance. David stared at the frozen image of his children, his hands trembling slightly from his latest round of chemotherapy. They're taking everything from them, not just their father, but their real memories, their sense of what's true. We're not going to let that happen, Mark promised, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. We're going to save your kids and make them pay for every lie they've told. Dr. McPherson nodded in agreement. Once we expose the manipulation, we can begin proper therapy to help them separate fact from implanted fiction. But Mark is right. We need to move carefully. A premature confrontation could push them further into Lauren and Adam's narrative. David stood, moving closer to the screen. He touched the image of his children's faces, leaving a smudge on the monitor. How much more evidence do we need? We're close, Mark assured him. My contacts at the FBI are building a case for criminal charges. We just need to catch them explicitly planning their next move. Keep going to your treatments. Keep acting normal. Let them think their plan is working. David nodded, his builder's mind already constructing a different kind of project. Not of wood and steel, but of truth and justice. He would rebuild his family's foundation stronger than before, but first he had to carefully dismantle the web of lies that threatened to destroy everything he loved. Whatever it takes, he said quietly, his voice carrying the same determination that had built his company from nothing. Whatever it takes to save my children. Sylvia Reed's corner office overlooked the city's downtown district, its windows streaked with early morning rain. The criminal defense attorney's desk bore none of the usual family photos or personal touches, just neat stacks of case files and a single potted succulent. Mark had recommended her for precisely this reason. She lived for her work, and her 90% success rate proved it. Walk me through the timeline again, Sylvia said, her Mont Blanc pen hovering over a legal pad. She'd already filled 3 pages with notes during their 2-hour meeting. When did you first notice the supplements? David pulled out his phone, checking the calendar app. The chemotherapy made his memory fuzzy sometimes. Lauren started with the vitamins about 8 months ago. Small white pills she said would boost my immune system. And the cough began 2 months after that. David's hand went to his throat, a habit he developed since the diagnosis. She was insistent about the supplements. Would watch me take them every morning. Sylvia's pen scratched across the paper. We'll need those pills analyzed. Mark, can your lab contacts handle that discreetly? Mark nodded from his position by the window. Already sent samples to a private lab in Virginia. Should have results by the end of the week. Good. Sylvia turned to a fresh page. Now about the company finances. These ghost contracts Adam created. I need every detail. David spread the financial documents across Sylvia's desk. His builders I had caught discrepancies that others might have missed. See these material orders? The quantities don't match any of our actual projects. And here, he pointed to a series of invoices. These labor costs are for a crew that doesn't exist. How long has Adam had access to your company's finances? He helped me start the business 20 years ago, handled most of the accounting since then. David's voice cracked. I trusted him with everything. Sylvia's expression softened slightly. That's exactly what predators like Adam count on. Trust is their hunting ground. She pulled up another file on her computer. Look at this. The screen showed police reports from 3 different states. Adam's name appeared in each one, though with slight variations. Adam Carter, A.J. Carter, Adam Martinez. Same pattern in each case, Sylvia explained. He targets successful business owners, particularly those in construction or real estate, usually through their wives. The affairs last 2 to 3 years while he systematically drains the companies. When the money's gone, both he and the wife disappear. But the children? David's hands clenched. They've never targeted the children before. That's what makes your case different. A new voice joined the conversation as Dr. Claire McPherson entered the office. The child psychologist carried a thick folder of her own, her professional demeanor masking obvious concern. Dr. McPherson, Sylvia said, standing to greet her. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Call me Claire. She took the seat next to David. I've reviewed the video footage Mark provided. What they're doing to your children is a form of psychological abuse called memory implantation. It's similar to techniques used in cult programming. David's throat tightened. Can it be reversed? With proper therapy, yes. But we need to document everything first. Every session they have with the children. Every story they plan. It's all evidence of systematic abuse. Mark's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. Speaking of documentation, they've scheduled another therapy session with the kids for tomorrow. Where? Sylvia asked. Adam's Lake House again. They seem to favor it for these sessions. We'll have audio and visual coverage, Claire said, her tone professional, but her eyes angry. Every lie they tell those children is another nail in their legal coffin. David pushed himself to his feet, fighting a wave of chemotherapy-induced nausea. The latest round of treatment had been particularly brutal, but he forced himself to focus. What's our next step? Sylvia gathered the documents into organized piles. We build an airtight case. Every financial transaction, every forged document, every manipulative session with the children. We document it all. Mark's surveillance gives us the evidence. Claire provides expert testimony on the psychological abuse, and I'll make sure it holds up in court. And the children? David's voice carried the weight of a father's worry. How do we protect them while this plays out? We watch and wait, Claire advised. Any premature intervention could push them further into Lauren and Adam's narrative. We need them to begin questioning things on their own. As if on cue, Mark's phone buzzed again. His eyebrows rose as he read. The message. That might be happening sooner than we thought. Michael just texted his mother, asking to visit David in the hospital tomorrow. David's heart leaped. He hasn't visited since the diagnosis. This could be important, Claire cautioned. But remember, no confrontation, no accusations. Just listen and observe. Michael needs to come to his realizations naturally. The hospital room's afternoon light cast long shadows across David's bed. The chemotherapy Ford dripped steadily, marking time like a metronome. He'd timed this treatment deliberately, wanting Michael to see the reality of his condition. Not for sympathy, but for truth. Michael entered hesitantly, his lanky teenage frame seeming to fold in on itself. At 15, he stood as tall as his father, but today he looked smaller, uncertain. "Hey, Dad." Michael hovered near the door, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "You?" "I'm fighting cancer." David offered a weak smile. "It's okay to say it." Michael moved closer, taking the chair beside the bed. His eyes darted to the 4 bags, the monitors, the evidence of his father's battle. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. The medicines they use to fight the cancer are pretty strong." David kept his voice neutral, factual. "But the doctors say I'm responding well." A nurse entered to check David's vitals, nodding approvingly at the numbers before leaving them alone again. The silence stretched between father and son, filled with unasked questions. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, something doesn't feel right." David's heart raced, but he kept his expression calm. "What do you mean?" "Last week, I heard Mom and Adam arguing. They didn't know I was home. I'd forgotten my baseball glove and came back early from practice." Michael pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve, just as he had in the video footage. "Adam said something about sticking to the story, and Mom said they couldn't risk the kids finding out the truth." David's hands gripped the hospital blanket, but he forced them to relax. "That must have been confusing to hear. And the memories they keep talking about." Michael looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. "The plate you supposedly threw? I keep trying to remember it, but it feels wrong. Like trying to remember a movie I never actually watched." Years of construction work had taught David the importance of a solid foundation. You couldn't build anything lasting on shifting sand. He thought carefully before speaking. "Michael, what do you remember about your childhood? Not what you've been told to remember. What do you actually remember?" The boy's brow furrowed in concentration. "I remember you teaching me to use tools in your workshop. You were always super careful, making sure I knew about safety first. And when I'd get frustrated because I couldn't do something right, you never yelled. You'd just say, 'Measure twice, cut once.'" They finished together. "Those are real memories, aren't they?" Michael asked, his voice cracking. "Not like the other stuff?" David reached for his son's hand, relief flooding through him when Michael didn't pull away. "I have never, would never, hurt you or your sister. Every memory of love, of patience, of teaching and learning together, those are real." Michael's shoulders began to shake. "They've been lying to us? Mom and Adam? They've been making us believe things that never happened?" "I think," David said carefully, "it's time you saw something." He nodded to the corner of the room, where Mark had been sitting quietly, nearly invisible in the shadows. Mark opened his laptop, pulling up one of the recorded therapy sessions. Michael watched, his face draining of color as he saw himself and Emma being coached, saw the careful way Lauren and Adam planted suggestions, twisted memories, and created fear where none had existed. "Oh God," Michael choked out. "Emma, they're still doing this to Emma." "We're going to stop them," David promised. "But we need your help." Mark moved forward, his military training evident in his precise movements. "Michael, what we're about to ask you is difficult and potentially dangerous. You'll need to pretend everything is normal while helping us gather evidence. Can you do that?" Michael wiped his eyes, straightening in his chair. In that moment, he looked less like a confused 15-year-old and more like the man he was becoming. "What do you need me to do?" Mark's basement command center hummed with activity. New monitors had been added, each displaying different aspects of their operation. One showed a live feed from Adam's lake house. Another tracked financial transactions across multiple accounts, and a third displayed a complex timeline of events. "Your cancer's taken a turn for the worse," Mark explained, pointing to the latest medical report they'd carefully doctored. "According to this, the treatment isn't working as well as hoped. The prognosis is 3 months, maybe less." David examined the report. "They'll want to verify this." "Already handled," Sylvia interjected. She'd been practically living in Mark's office for the past week. "I have a contact in hospital records. The information is in the system if they check." "They're checking," Michael confirmed from his position at one of the monitors. He'd proved remarkably adept at surveillance work, his teenage facility with technology combining well with Mark's training. Mom just accessed the hospital portal from her phone. The wait was excruciating. David forced himself to breathe slowly, fighting both the lingering effects of his latest treatment and the anxiety of waiting. Finally, Michael's phone buzzed. "She's calling Adam," he reported, putting the phone on speaker. Lauren's voice filled the room. "Did you see it? The new prognosis." "I saw it." Adam's voice carried an edge of excitement, poorly disguised as concern. "We need to move faster." "How are the offshore accounts?" "Almost ready." "But Adam, the kids." "Stick to the plan, Lauren. Once we have the insurance money and the company assets, we'll be set for life. The kids would only complicate things." Michael's hands clenched into fists, but he maintained his composure, just as Mark had trained him. David felt a surge of pride through his anger. His son was stronger than Lauren or Adam had ever guessed. Over the next week, they watched as Lauren and Adam accelerated their plans. Company assets began disappearing, transferred through a complex web of shell corporations. Insurance paperwork was updated. New accounts appeared in banks known for their discretion in handling large transactions. "They're getting sloppy," Sylvia observed, reviewing the latest financial records. "Making mistakes in their hurry." "Good," Mark replied. He turned to David. "It's time to bring in my FBI contacts. We've got enough evidence now. The financial fraud, the psychological abuse, the conspiracy. They'll want to move quickly." David nodded, then looked at Michael. "Are you ready for what comes next? Once we involve the FBI, there's no going back." Michael glanced at the monitor showing Emma in her room, doing homework, unaware of the truth about to break around her. "I'm ready. Emma deserves to know the truth." And he swallowed hard. Mom and Adam need to pay for what they've done. Mark made the call. Within hours, his basement office was filled with federal agents, each assigned to a specific aspect of the operation. They moved with quiet efficiency, documenting transactions, analyzing recordings, building their case. "We'll need your sister's testimony eventually," one agent explained gently to Michael. "But not until she's ready. Dr. McPherson will help with that." The pieces were falling into place. Lauren and Adam's carefully constructed web of lies was about to collapse, but David felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for his children and what they'd endured. "Dad," Michael's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "What happens after? When this is all over?" David pulled his son close, his heart aching at how long it had been since he'd been able to offer such comfort. "We rebuild. Together. Every memory they stole, every lie they told, we replace it with truth. And this time, we build on solid ground." The monitors continued their silent vigil, recording every move Lauren and Adam made, every conversation, every attempt to destroy a family for profit. But they had underestimated the strength of real family bonds, the resilience of truth, and the determination of a father's love. The endgame was approaching, and this time, David held all the cards. The family therapy center's waiting room smelled of artificial lavender and broken promises. Lauren sat primly on the beige couch, her manicured nails drumming against her designer purse. Adam stood by the window, his confidence evident in his stance. Neither noticed the slight bulge under the receptionist's desk, where surveillance equipment had been carefully installed the night before. Emma perched on the edge of her chair, dark circles under her eyes betraying nights of troubled sleep. Michael sat beside her, his hand occasionally brushing against the recording device Mark had concealed in his jacket pocket. The weight of it felt like armor. "Remember what we practiced?" Lauren whispered to Emma, her voice carrying easily to the hidden microphones. "Dr. Patterson needs to hear about the incidents clearly." What Lauren didn't know was that Dr. Patterson had called in sick that morning. In his place, Dr. Claire McPherson sat in the consultation room, reviewing the final pieces of evidence with David and the FBI agents. "They're all here," the receptionist confirmed through her earpiece. Claire nodded to David. "Are you ready?" David adjusted the collar of his shirt, hiding the medical port underneath. The latest round of chemotherapy had left him weaker, but determination burned in his eyes. "I've been ready since the day I saw that message on Lauren's phone." The receptionist's voice crackled through the waiting room speaker. "The doctor will see you now." Lauren stood, smoothing her skirt, Come on, kids. Honesty is important. Michael caught Emma's hand as they walked toward the consultation room. She squeezed back, not understanding why her brother's palm felt so sweaty. The consultation room door opened to reveal not the elderly Dr. Patterson, but a full complement of law enforcement officials, Child Protective Services representatives, and Dr. Claire McPherson. David sat in a chair near the large screen mounted on the wall, Mark standing like a sentinel beside him. What is this? Lauren's composure cracked. Where's Dr. Patterson? Please, everyone take a seat, Claire said, her professional tone brooking no argument. We have some recordings to review. Adam moved toward the door, but an FBI agent blocked his path. This is a closed session, Mr. Carter. The large screen flickered to life. The first image showed Lauren and Adam at his lake house, coaching Emma through her memories of abuse. Emma's face drained of color as she watched herself being manipulated, saw the careful way they planted suggestions, and twisted her recollections. That's not. Emma's voice trembled. You said those were therapy sessions? Keep watching, Michael whispered. The next clip showed Lauren and Adam in what they thought was a private moment, discussing their plans. Once we get the insurance money and the testimony, we disappear. Adam's voice filled the room. The kids would just complicate things. They're old enough to make their own way, Lauren replied. But what if they try to find us? They won't. Not after we're done making them believe their father was a monster. Besides, who would believe them over all the documented abuse? Emma's world tilted. She turned to her mother, seeking denial, explanation, anything. But Lauren's face had hardened into a mask of cold calculation. You were going to abandon us? Emma's voice cracked. Everything you told me about Dad, it was all lies. Emma, honey, you don't understand. Lauren reached for her daughter, but Emma recoiled. Don't touch me. The teenager's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if David hadn't moved to catch her. Daddy, I'm so sorry. I really thought. They made me believe. David held his daughter as she broke down, years of manufactured fears and false memories crumbling in the face of undeniable truth. Michael moved to join them, forming a protective circle around his sister. Adam made another move toward the door, but Mark stepped into his path. Going somewhere? We haven't even gotten to the financial evidence yet. Claire gestured to the FBI agents. I believe you have some questions for Ms. Reed and Mr. Carter. As the agents began reading Miranda rights, Emma clung to her father, her tears soaking into his shirt. How can I trust any of my memories now? How do I know what's real? We'll figure it out together, David promised, stroking her hair. That's what family really means. Not manipulation, not lies, but standing together through the hard times and helping each other heal. Lauren's mask finally cracked as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Emma, Michael, please, you have to understand. I was trying to protect you. From what? Michael's voice carried all the scorn of his 15 years. From a father who taught me how to build things, who came to every baseball game, who never, ever raised his voice, let alone his hand. The only monsters here, Emma said quietly, are you and Adam. The courthouse hallway echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. David sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom C, his children flanking him like honor guards. The chemotherapy had taken his hair, but not his dignity. If anything, his gaunt appearance served to highlight the stark contrast between reality and Lauren's manufactured accusations of abuse. Sylvia approached, her trial notes organized in her signature leather briefcase. The jury's coming back. That was fast. David's voice was calm. Only 4 hours of deliberation. Is that good or bad? Emma twisted the friendship bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit she developed during the trial. In a case this complex? Sylvia's lips curved in a satisfied smile. It's very good. It means the evidence was overwhelming. They filed back into the courtroom. Lauren and Adam sat at separate tables with their attorneys, both looking considerably less polished after 3 months in county jail. The evidence against them had been too substantial for bail. The jury filed in, none making eye contact with the defendants. The forewoman handed the verdict forms to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Marion Wheeler. The judge's face remained impassive as she reviewed the documents. Will the defendants please rise? Lauren stood, her orange jumpsuit a far cry from her usual designer wardrobe. Adam's confident smirk had finally cracked, showing the desperation beneath. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the count of attempted grand larceny? Guilty, Your Honor. The verdict continued. Guilty of child psychological abuse. Guilty of embezzlement. Guilty on all counts. Emma gripped David's hand with each pronouncement, while Michael sat straight-backed, his expression stern. Judge Wheeler set aside the verdict forms. Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to address something specific about this case. She looked directly at Lauren and Adam. In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many financial crimes. I've seen theft, fraud, and embezzlement. But what you two attempted goes beyond simple theft of money. You tried to steal children's love for their father. You attempted to destroy the very foundation of their reality, their ability to trust their own memories and experiences. That is an unforgivable crime. The judge adjusted her glasses. Mr. Carter, given your prior history of similar schemes in 3 other states, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. Ms. Reed, you are sentenced to 15 years. She paused, her gaze hardening. And let me be clear, these sentences are to be served consecutively, not concurrently. There will be no opportunity for early release. Lauren crumpled in her chair. Adam's facade finally shattered as the bailiffs approached to lead them away. Emma, Michael, Lauren called out, her voice breaking. Please, don't let it end like this. But her children had already turned away, following their father from the courtroom. In the hallway, they found Mark and Claire waiting. It's over, Mark said simply. No, Claire corrected gently. Now the real work begins. Healing, rebuilding trust, reconstructing authentic memories to replace the manufactured ones. David hugged his children close. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll do it together. 6 months after the trial, David stood in the cancer ward of Westwood Memorial Hospital, his hand hovering over the brass bell that patients rang to mark the end of their treatment. The latest scans had confirmed what his body had already begun to tell him. The cancer was in remission. Ring it, Dad. Michael called from where he stood with Emma, both teenagers beaming with pride. David gripped the bell's rope, and its clear tone rang through the ward. Medical staff appeared from various doors to applaud, many of them having been with him through the darkest days of his treatment. Dr. Chris Morgan emerged from the crowd, pulling David into a careful hug. When you first came in for that cough, I never imagined we'd be fighting 2 battles at once. 3 battles, Emma corrected, joining the embrace. The cancer, their betrayal, and our own minds. She'd been working with Claire twice a week, slowly untangling the web of false memories from her authentic ones. Speaking of minds, Claire said, appearing with a stack of journals under her arm. I have your new writing prompts ready. Michael, yours focuses on early baseball memories. Emma, we're going to work on those art class recollections you mentioned last session. The teenagers took their journals without complaint. The writing exercises had become a crucial part of their therapy, helping them strengthen real memories while identifying and processing the manufactured ones. Mark's waiting at the house, Michael reminded them. He's grilling steaks to celebrate. The drive home took them past their old neighborhood, but David felt no pull toward the house he'd once shared with Lauren. Instead, he turned toward the new development where they'd started fresh, a home he designed himself with input from both children. Mark stood at the grill on their back deck, the smell of perfectly cooked meat filling the air. The retired Marine had become such a fixture in their lives that the neighbors assumed he was a relative. Perfect timing, he called out, flipping a steak. Those potatoes you prepped are ready to go in the oven. As they settled around the outdoor table, David watched his children. Really watched them. Emma no longer flinched at sudden movements, and Michael had stopped checking his phone compulsively for messages from Lauren. They were healing. All of them. In their own ways. I've been thinking, Emma said, pushing her vegetables around her plate. I want to go back to the community center. Maybe volunteer with the art program again. David knew what this meant. The community center had been where Lauren first began planting false memories about his behavior during Emma's art classes. Returning there was more than volunteerism. It was reclaiming her space, her real memories. I'll go with you, Michael offered. They probably need help with the Little League program anyway. Claire nodded approvingly. That's excellent progress. Remember what we talked about, replacing negative associations with new, positive experiences. Mark raised his glass. To new experiences, then, and to family. The real kind, built on truth and trust. And to Dad, Emma added, her eyes shining, for fighting for us, even when we didn't know we needed saving. Later that evening, David stood at his bedroom window, watching Emma and Michael playing basketball in the driveway. Their laughter floated up through the gathering dusk, real and unburdened. The shadows had lifted, replaced by the warm glow of authentic connection. On his dresser, 3 items sat in a row. The brass bell from the cancer ward, a family photo taken at the courthouse after the verdict, and a small construction level. The level, he decided, would become their family's new symbol, a reminder that with the right foundation and careful work, anything could be built straight and true. Even a shattered family could be rebuilt, one authentic memory at a time. Epilogue 10 years later. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from David Kim's new workshop, a sprawling space behind his rebuilt construction company headquarters. At 55, his hair had regrown silver after the chemotherapy, matching the distinguished lines around his eyes. The past decade had left its marks, but they were badges of survival rather than scars of defeat. Dad, the Mitchell project designs are ready for review, Emma's voice called from the office. At 27, she had followed in her father's footsteps, earning her architectural degree and joining the family business. Her designs had already won several sustainable building awards, bringing a fresh perspective to Kim Construction's portfolio. David smiled, remembering how far they'd come. The same hands that once trembled holding Lauren's phone now steadily guided their company toward new horizons. The business had not only recovered from Adam's embezzlement, but had grown stronger, with Michael handling the financial side after completing his MBA. No contract was signed, no transaction approved without multiple sets of eyes reviewing the details, a lesson learned at too high a cost. Send them to the conference room, he called back. Mark's coming by to see them too. Mark Travis, now fully gray but still maintaining his military bearing, had remained an integral part of their lives. His security consulting firm occupied the east wing of the building, and he had become the uncle figure the children never had. His wedding, too. Claire McPherson 3 years ago had simply formalized what they all knew. Their unlikely family had grown stronger through adversity. Michael entered carrying fresh coffee, his suit jacket draped over one arm. At 25, he developed into a shrewd businessman with an unwavering moral compass. Just got the quarterly update from the victim restitution program, he said, setting down the cups. 2 more of Adam's previous victims have been fully compensated. The program had been Michael's initiative. After discovering more of Adam's past victims across different states, he'd established a fund to help them recover their losses. It was his way of turning their family's trauma into something positive. Any word from the parole board? Mark asked, entering with a tablet under his arm. David shook his head. Lauren's 3rd appeal was denied last month. The psychological abuse charges particularly stuck. Claire's testimony made sure of that. The mention of Lauren brought a familiar weight to the room. She had served 8 years of her 15-year sentence, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Her letters to the children had stopped after year 5, when neither Emma nor Michael replied. The last they'd heard, she developed a reputation in the women's correctional facility for manipulating younger inmates, resulting in her losing privileges and being transferred to a higher security unit. Adam's fate had been even grimmer. His 25-year sentence had been extended after he attempted to run another scheme from inside prison, trying to manipulate a guard's wife into smuggling contraband. The additional charges had effectively ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. I saw her last week, Emma said quietly, entering with the project files. The room stilled. They all knew who she meant. At the grocery store, of all places. Remember Mrs. Henderson? She used to play bridge with Mom. David nodded. The bridge club had been one of Lauren's hunting grounds, where she'd spread the first whispered lies about David's temper. She couldn't look me in the eye, Emma continued, spreading the blueprints across the conference table. None of them can anymore, not after everything came out in the trial. The whole bridge club dissolved, you know? Nobody trusted each other after realizing they'd all been used to verify Mom's false stories. Claire arrived as Emma was speaking, her therapist's insight as sharp as ever despite her semi-retirement. She now focused solely on cases involving false memory implantation, having become a leading expert in the field. Her paper on the Kim case, with the family's permission and names changed, had become required reading in several psychology programs. How did seeing her make you feel? Claire asked, settling into her usual chair. Emma's hands traced the lines of her latest design as she considered the question. Sad. Mostly. Not for her, but for who I thought she was. The mother I remember from my early childhood. I still don't know how much of that was real and how much was manipulation. The good memories can be real even if the person who helped make them turned out to be false, Claire reminded her gently. It was a therapeutic principle they developed together over years of sessions. Michael loosened his tie, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage self. I got another letter from Adam last week. He's still trying to claim he was manipulated by Mom, that he lost himself in her scheme. Michael shook his head. The investigators found his previous cases, though. 3 other families before us. He was always the architect, not the victim. Speaking of architects, Mark interjected, sensing the need to shift the conversation. Show me these new designs, Emma. That sustainable materials program you proposed is exactly what the city contract needs. As Emma launched into her presentation, David watched his family. The one he'd fought so hard to save and the one that had grown beyond blood ties. Mark and Claire sat close, their shoulders touching, while Michael took notes with the same intensity he'd once applied to baseball. Each of them carried scars from the ordeal, but they'd learned to wear them with grace. The workshop windows offered a view of the memorial garden they'd planted 5 years ago, dedicated to victims of psychological abuse. It had been Emma's idea, a way to transform their pain into purpose. The garden had become a sanctuary for other families healing from similar betrayals, its paths lined with plaques offering resources and hope. Claire's therapy groups often met there, sitting among the flowers and sharing their stories. Some days, David would catch snippets of their conversations, tales of betrayal, manipulation, and eventual triumph that echoed his own journey. Each story reinforced what he'd learned, that the greatest victories often came disguised as defeats, and the deepest wounds could become wellsprings of strength. A young woman emerged from one such group session, wiping tears from her eyes. David recognized her, the daughter of one of Adam's previous victims, only now beginning to untangle the web of lies that had ensnared her family 15 years ago. Michael had found her during his research for the restitution program. Mr. Kim, she called out, seeing him through the window. I wanted to thank you. What your family did, exposing them, establishing the support network, it helped me understand what happened to my mom. David invited her in, introducing her to the others. As she shared her story, he saw Emma and Michael exchange glances. They recognized their own past pain in her words, but also the possibility of healing. You know, Mark said later, as they locked up for the day, when I first installed those surveillance cameras at Adams Lake House, I never imagined we'd end up here. Running a construction empire, hosting therapy groups, changing lives. Life's funny that way, David replied, checking the security system, a habit he'd never lost. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to our truest path. The setting sun cast long shadows through the workshop, but unlike the shadows of their past, these were clean and honest. They stretched toward the garden where new flowers were always blooming, much like the hope that had grown from their darkest moments. Later that evening, they gathered at David's house, a tradition that had survived every storm. Claire brought her signature lasagna. Mark mixed his famous mojitos, virgin versions for the younger members of their extended family, and Emma's teenage daughter, Sophie, practiced card tricks she'd learned at school. Sophie, born 3 years after the trial, represented everything they'd fought for. A new generation growing up surrounded by authentic love and honest memories. She knew the family history, had been told an age-appropriate version of events, but to her, it was like a story from another world. Her reality was filled with Sunday dinners, family game nights, and the unconditional love of a father, uncle, and grandparents who had learned the true meaning of family the hard way. As David watched Sophie dealing cards with the same focused expression Michael used to wear at baseball games, he realized that this was their real victory. Not the prison sentences, not the recovered assets, not even the professional successes, but this, the simple ability to create genuine memories untainted by manipulation and lies. Lauren and Adam had tried to destroy his family with false memories, but in doing so, they had taught them all the immeasurable value of truth. Their betrayal had forced David to fight not just for his life, but for the very essence of family love. In winning that fight, he and his children had built something far stronger than what they'd lost, a legacy of honesty, resilience, and unconditional support that would echo through generations. The night ended as it always did, with everyone helping to clean up, making plans for next week's dinner, sharing the small details that made up a real family's life. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, just the simple truth of people who had chosen to face life's challenges together. As the last car pulled away, David stood in his doorway, breathing in the night air. Somewhere in a prison cell, Lauren and Adam were living with the consequences of their choices. But here, in the home and family they tried to destroy, life bloomed anew, proving that the strongest foundations are built not on deception, but on the bedrock of unwavering love and truth. He closed the door, set the alarm. Old habits die hard, and smiled at the family photos lining his hallway. Each one told a story of recovery, renewal, and the kind of love that only grows stronger when tested by fire. The shadows had long since lifted, and in their place, a legacy of truth continued to flower, season after season, year after year. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.